School, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to come and spend some days with us. My name is Avery. I'm a professor here at the Kennedy School, and I'm also delighted to have the opportunity to tell you a little bit about some of my research and some of the policy questions related to this research and work that others are doing in other areas. As the heading of IDEASpHERE, I have to confess that if you look at the title, High Achieving Students, and even more especially equality of opportunity in the American educational system, this isn't a new idea, and it's certainly not original to me. So I'm not necessarily living up to the title IDEASpHERE, producing new and innovative ideas, but I think that it's an incredibly important idea and worth a lot of our attention. And it's much the focus of a lot of the work that I do. I'm an economist by training, but I think you'll see this talk is much more in the tradition of the sociology of education. And as I said, it's not a new idea. And there have been big developments and a long history in the equality of opportunity in education in the US, both on the legal side, dating at least back to the Brown versus Board of Education decision in the 1950s, and on the scholarly side, dating back to a hallmark, at least the Coleman report of the 1960s, and that really was work in the sociology of education, sponsored by the American government to try to determine if, in fact, schools were giving students equal opportunity. I also want to mention my colleague, Sandy Jenks, who you may know as Christopher Jenks, which she goes by in writing, who's been writing on this subject for many, many years, and I've had a number of enlightening conversations with him during my time here at the Kennedy School. And I think just to give a little bit of a starting point, an overview, I think many of us, certainly I've been drawn to this topic by the idea that education is the engine of social mobility. Look for a quotation. It's so ubiquitous to note that, and people use this phrase all the time, but I couldn't actually find any single place that originated it. So that's an exciting point, but at the same time, we know that there's growing evidence about the achievement gap. And this seems a little bit like a paradox. Education is the thing that's supposed to equalize social opportunity and overcome existing inequalities, and yet, in many ways, it seems to create persistent inequality by systematizing those inequalities that already exist. So I'm going to ask a simple question today, which is, how much of the gap in achievement is explained by differences in opportunity? And I'm going to focus on particular levels of education. My own work has started with higher education, and now I'm moving back a little bit into high school. So I will say that I'm not thinking about equality opportunity in one of the places that's most important, which is in the early years of the K-12 education and possibly even in preschool. So I'm going to be just clear on what I'm focusing on and what I'm not going to be discussing today. And I have a little bit of an outline, so I'll give some brief background. First, my entree into this work, which is at the college level, and I'll give some quick background on that. And I'll talk a little bit more at length about some interesting information you might think about looking at when we look at high schools, and we'll leave some time for discussion. In terms of the timing, I've seen that the schedule's two different versions of the schedule, 8:30 to 9:30 or 8:30 to 10. I'm operating on the idea that it's 8:30 to 9:30. You can have a little bit of a break afterwards. We can certainly run over it if there's interest. I'll probably talk for about half an hour. Please feel free to interrupt me if you have questions along the way, but also keep in mind that if you have a burning question, there'll be plenty of something you really want to discuss. We'll leave plenty of time for that. And I'll start with some text, a couple of bullet points, and then I'll show with the idea of leading into some graphs. And this is both my personal history, intellectual history, and how I got interested in this subject, but also I think two key results from other researchers that are very important and eye-opening at the college level. This paradox about the idea that education is the engine of social mobility, and yet we have so much of an achievement gap, is hard to resolve. I think everybody comes to their own resolution, or remains very uneasy about it. The one way I always tried to come to terms with it was to think that no matter where you come from, if you do well enough at some point in education, then the playing field is level. And I wasn't sure exactly where that was, but I certainly thought that anybody who'd gone to a good college, or anyone who had done really well in high school, that was probably enough to so the starting point wouldn't matter as much anymore. And I've been jolted in my view about that in a couple of different research works. One of them by Dean Elwood with Tom Kane, who is also now my co-author, who runs the Center at the Graduate School of Education. And that's about 14 years old now. But their finding is that, in fact, my view was just wrong for the most part. So my view was that once you got through high school, it really wouldn't matter where you started from. And what they show is that, in fact, income and prior achievement are pretty much substitutes. You can have one or the other, but what you really want is both if you want to get far ahead. And then the second is some work by folks at the Consortium for Chicago School Research. Melissa Broderick led that work, and in fact, a lot of the roads trace back to Kennedy School. She was David Elwood's David Elwood was her primary advisor when she was a doctoral student at the Kennedy School, and she now leads a number of research efforts in Chicago. And the main finding of this work, in a series of reports, the one I'll talk about is called Potholes on the Road to College. They tracked students from Chicago into college, and one of the things that they found was even very spectacular students in high school could go to some colleges where the odds were really stacked against them. And so that, again, was very eye-opening to me. It's not good enough just to be a spectacular student in high school if you don't make it to the right college. That work was generalized by Bill Bowen, who was formerly the president of Princeton and at the Mellon Foundation. He's written a series of books on higher education and equality of opportunity. And he found exactly what Melissa Broderick wrote, that finding generalizes to the sort of a national scale, that especially low-income students at less than spectacular colleges, even if they're high achieving in high school, the odds are still stacked against them in college, which is not true for students from higher income backgrounds. Now, a couple of graphs just to nail these findings home. This is from Kane and Elwood. And by the way, if you're interested, I'm happy to make a PowerPoint presentation available, and I've got a slide at the very, very end with a tiny list of, in tiny fonts, all the references to everything I'll talk about today. If you're, so please, I see some people taking notes, but if you're interested in any of these references, they're definitely easy to track down. I've tried to make that possible for all of you. So what Kane and Elwood did is they went to some national longitudinal surveys. And this is one of the big advantages that we have today over the work that Coleman and others did years and years ago. We have much better data. And some of the data has been collected by the government in a series of longitudinal studies, meaning they track the same people over time. And Kane and Elwood looked at, I believe this comes from the National Study of Youth, NLSY, and National Labor Study of Youth. And that was primarily tracking students into the job market, but education is important along the way. And they said, let's just look at two different classifications. One is your socioeconomic status as family, and for a lot of today, the standard method in these works is to look at quartiles, divide the world into fours. The high quartile is the top 25%, the low quartile is the bottom 25%. So they said, let's divide families into high, medium, and low, and look at the high and low, the top 25% and the bottom 25%. So we've got high SES and low SES in the two categories. And then let's look at the rate of college enrollment. And they divided students into three math groups, low, medium, and high. So that's not quartiles, that's actually thirds, low, medium, and high. And they said, okay, let's look at the relationship between SES and math ability in high school and how that translates into college going. What they find is naturally, well, two things. One, high SES students are more likely to go to college than low, not surprising. Unfortunate but not surprising. And the other is that there's an upward trend here. As math scores go up, the students are more likely to go to college. So neither one of those is too surprising, but the striking fact is that if you look at the far right bar on low SES, these are the highest math performers from the low SES, low socioeconomic status families, so low SES socioeconomic status families. And you compare that to the lowest bar on the right. Those are the lowest math performers from the highest socioeconomic status families. Those bars look pretty similar. They're not exactly the same, but they're pretty close. And so that was their finding that said actually math and socioeconomic status are kind of substitutes when it comes to going to college. And that definitely is a blow against my view that the playing field was equal if you could be really good, a really good student. Yeah?
What happens with verbal scores or verbal abilities?
I don't think that they actually reported that in the paper. One of my own findings on looking at work like this is it turns out that math and verbal are really closely aligned. So you might think that actually what's going on, especially in the right tail of the math distribution, is you've got people who are wonks but they've never read a book. But it turns out that's not true. It's surprisingly, I don't think that they did this in their paper, but when I've done work like this, as I said, it really looks almost exactly the same. So there's a striking correlation between verbal and math. And then Melissa Roderick, what her study did, so I'll have to orient you to the axes here. The horizontal axis is an unweighted high school GPA. And I actually have to make a point about this, which is that before I had studied, had much ability to study data from a lot of different school districts, I had the impression that there were many school districts around the country where it was easy to get a 4.0. And in fact, that's far from the truth. It's very hard to get a 4.0. And relatively few, in Chicago, the GPA, like many other districts, is in fact a really good screen. And it's a small fraction, maybe 5% of students who are going to be towards the far right here. And so this is actually an important measure that people on the far right are true standouts in high school. So we've got the unweighted high school GPA, and then they look at the college graduation rates for popular colleges. And so each one of these bars, again, sort of goes up as you move to the right, which is suggesting that better students are more likely to graduate from each college. What's striking here is if you look at the students with a 4.0, there's a huge range of graduation rates. And at the top, there's Northwestern, which is basically 100. And at the bottom, there's Northeastern Illinois, which is basically 30 to 40. 30, looks like 30 really. And okay, now that's a big outlier, but nevertheless, it's an incredible shock to see that there's at any college where students who come through the schools of Chicago with a 4.0 GPA could go and have the odds stacked against them. It's very unlikely to graduate from that college. Now you can imagine a lot of different things that could be explanations for that. We don't know that from this data. One of them is that probably there's some difference in the 4.0 students who go to Northwestern and the 4.0 students who go to Northeastern Illinois. Those students from Northeastern Illinois probably couldn't get into Northwestern. Maybe their test scores weren't so high. And it's probably true that if you took some of the students who were at Northwestern and made them go to Northeastern Illinois, they'd probably do a little bit better. They'd probably be a little bit more likely to graduate. But is there a 70 percentage point difference in graduation? Is that going to explain a 70 percentage point difference in graduation rates? To me, this was shocking that, as I said, these students could be in so much trouble with regards to their chances of graduating from college. And of course, you have to feel terrible for them. I'm sure none of the students who enrolled in that college understood just what the odds were. This led me to some of my own work, and I'm going to show you a graph from a paper that I wrote with Caroline Hoxby, who is a professor at Stanford. Caroline was the lead author on this paper. And what we did was we gathered data from a number of different sources, especially from the College Board and the ACT. And these are national standardized testing organizations. Most students who go to selective colleges will take at least one of these tests. So we felt like we had a good sense of the universe of all the students who would be aiming at very selective colleges. And we just looked at where they set their test scores. And unfortunately, I couldn't figure out how to do this. This got chopped off. But the bottom is, we've rated the colleges on just their average SAT scores. So we compare the students' SAT scores to the average SAT scores of the colleges. And on the right is about equal. And as you move to the far right, the college has a little bit of a higher SAT score than on average than the students. And the far left is much of a difference. The college is much lower on average SAT score than the student. This is just one measure of the quality or the likely graduation rates of the colleges. But essentially the message of the Roderick and Bowen work is that the better the college, the higher the SAT score, the more likely are students to graduate. Three different bars here, the purple, green, and light blue. The purple represents the universe of colleges where high-income students set their test scores. The green, medium, and the blue, low income. And these are all students in the top 10% of the SAT score distribution, so that was our definition of high achieving. And our main point here is the low SES students in this group are stacking the odds against themselves by applying primarily to colleges where they're going to be much above the average. And it's going to be like the Northeastern Illinois example. The odds are going to be relatively stacked against them. Whereas, by sharp contrast, the high achieving students aren't looking at most of those colleges at all. They're only aiming high. This led me to think that maybe something similar might be going on in high school. So what I'll tell you about today is just some very preliminary results that anybody can replicate. A lot of the work that I just described relied on very specialized data. The Kane and Elwood work was actually based on a national government survey that anybody could look at. But the work by Melissa Roderick and Bill Bowen and by Hawksby with me, all of that relied on specialized data. So what I'll talk about today is looking at the equality of opportunity in high schools using the Educational Longitudinal Study of 2002. So that was tracking 10th graders for up to 10 years. So we now actually have a pretty good idea of what's happened to them into early adulthood. This is very public data. There is, in fact, a more restricted use version of the data that I hope to be analyzing and going in more detail, but I'll be able to report at least a lot of results. And in fact, if you wanted to, you could go home and check out a lot of this yourself. What they did was they tried to create a nationally representative sample of 750 schools. I believe they were all public schools, although I'm not certain about that, with 15,000 students. And so I went to the computer and downloaded the data, and what I want to do is look at the high achieving students. The easiest way to classify students in this data is based on their initial math scores. They have a math quartile variable for the 10th grade, so I'm going to look at high performing 10th graders and then think about what happens to them from then on. Deb's question was a great one because I could have looked at high-performing 10th graders on the English score or some combination, and I think it would be a pretty similar group of students. And I'm going to do two things. One is I'm just going to replicate some information about the achievement gap. It's not going to be providing you any new phenomena, but it's still striking, I think, to see just how big the achievement gap is in the 10th grade. Based on parental education, based on family income, this is one of these phenomena where you could think of a wide range of ways of classifying demographics and talking about who's advantaged and who's disadvantaged. And there's enough of an overlap, sadly, that it almost is not going to matter. We're going to see really striking findings. So I'll show you both the achievement gap by parental education and family income. And then for the most part after that, I'll concentrate on family income because we can see that the results overlap quite a bit. In the public use data, the outcome variables that are easy to look at, I'll look at the 10th grade math score both as sort of an outcome of everything that happened up until then, but also as a predictor for the future. So identify the high achieving students. And then I'm interested in three further things that they might do. One is to take calculus. That's an interesting measure of their the access to advanced coursework. If they're in the top 25% on the 10th grade math, they probably, almost all of them, could conceivably take calculus. In the public use variable, I don't have, they don't report the AP test scores. They have that in their restricted use data, but they do have self-reported years of different math classes, so we can look at that. There's also information for the most recent follow-up, 10 years after 10th grade. Did you ever attend a four-year college? It's a pretty coarse measure. It's not about graduation, it's just attending. It doesn't talk about how many years. At least I won't talk about how many years today. I'll just look at did you ever attend. And then there's also a variable for selective college, which I don't know exactly what they described as a selective college, but as you'll see, the results are so sharp, it almost doesn't matter how they define it. And I like this feeling that these decisions you might make in the variables to choose are not so important in instances in which the findings are particularly striking. So I'll try to, and that's true for most of the things I'll talk about today. The achievement gap by parental education. So this is the highest education for any parent. from no college. So on the left, it means neither parent went to college at all. In the middle is at least one college grad, one parent has a BA, and in the right is at least one parent has a graduate degree. And all I'm doing here is raw counts. So based on the parental education group, where do you stand in the 10th grade math score? Quartile 1, quartile 2, quartile 3, quartile 4. And so already, this is a familiar result in this year. We've had a number of people who've been writing about how much is determined by where you're born and how much who your parents are. This is yet one more result like this, and it should, unfortunately, it's all too familiar. If neither one of your parents went to college, you're only 12% likely, about half as likely as random, to be in the top quarter, and 36% likely to be in the bottom. And the striking finding, well, if your parents went to, at least one of your parents went to college, you're 35% likely to be in the top 25%, and if one of your parents has a graduate degree, it's almost 50-50 that you're in the top quarter. If I do the same graph, it's going to look almost exactly the same, except that this graph is, instead of parental education, by parental socioeconomic status, from lowest quartile to highest quartile. One of the reasons it's almost exactly the same is there's a high degree of correlation between parental education and socioeconomic status. But once again, you see the same finding. If your parents are in the top quartile, you're about 50% likely, it's almost 50-50, that you're in the top quarter of math performance in the 10th grade. If your parents are in the bottom quartile, it's even worse than before. It's almost 50% likely you're in the bottom. So much is determined just by who your parents are and what your socioeconomic status happens to be. Obviously, this is a combination of factors of schooling, culture, expectations, all kinds of things along the way, many of which we really couldn't hope to address in a short period of time. And it's, of course, discouraging that 60 years after the Brown versus Board of Education decision and 50 years after the Coleman report, which solidly focused the country on the importance of opportunity in education, we still see these dramatic findings about the importance of parents. Yes.
I'm interested in the differences in generations in total,
right,
in terms of college education and so on. And is the United States actually improving from generation to generation in the last iteration? And I guess where I'm thinking as a non-American is you look at countries like Korea, where nobody had a college education, and then one generation later, half of them did, and there's dramatic changes in their poverty situation.
So I haven't done enough of the historical work to make a direct comparison. What I can say is that there's been quite a bit of discussion of this idea in the context of recent Supreme Court decisions about the revisiting Brown versus Board of Education, which said that the quote, separate but equal schools were not actually equal. And one of the logic for massive desegregation work in K-12, and some of the logic in the original decision was that it was to overcome existing inequalities dating back to slavery and the Civil War, and there was some idea of a sunset for an element of the work, that if we could redress the historical differences dating and disadvantages, especially for descendants of slaves, that at some point we would no longer need to be making radical changes in schooling. Conceivably, everyone could go back to neighborhood schools. So there has been some historical work on whether or not the achievement gap between black and white has diminished over time. And also you'd say, well, if you wanted it to sunset, if you wanted to say, let's let affirmative action or a variety of other programs designed to equalize, to promote the achievement of the disadvantaged groups, if you wanted to just look at trends, how long would it take to equalize? A long time is the answer. So there's a tiny movement, compression of the achievement gap between black and white, is what this literature found, but it's at such a slow pace that it's not hopeful. But it's an interesting question. Another way to say it is, without looking at it's true, we don't have, looking at this graph, we don't know where things stood in 1970 or 1950, but it's hard to believe that they were much worse. And so now let's play this forward. let's look at the 3 outcome variables I talked about that I was interested in today. Do you report that you took calculus? And I want to mention that that's actually kind of a coarser measure, and will probably minimize the amount of inequality that we're going to see, because many people, Deb is a math expert, Deb Usalit is here, as she can well document, there's lots of classes that are called calculus that actually don't have anything like calculus in them. And those tend to be the classes at schools that are lower performing. So that this is just, did you take a class that was called calculus? Did you attend a 4-year college? Did you attend whatever they measured as a selective college? And again, you see just how much the playing field is stacked against the students from the lowest quartiles. It looks like they're about 5 times as students from the top SES quartiles, about 5 times as likely to take calculus, about 10 times as likely to attend a selective college, and maybe 2.5 times as likely to have attended a 4-year college at any time by comparison to the bottom. So there's huge achievement gap. None of this is new, but I think it's natural to put the slides up so that you can take away just a sense of the magnitude of these gaps that come out immediately from data you could go back to your office and download in 5 minutes. One thing you might say then is, well, a lot of those achievement gaps, at least on that last slide, at the college level, have to do with things that happened earlier in the K-12 system. Well, so what if we just look at the top quartile of students following the same kind of method that I worked in for my paper with Caroline Hoxby? Let's isolate attention on students who have done really well up until some point. For 2 reasons. One is that you actually feel like those students might well be comparable. We've gotten rid of all of the things that would contribute to that happened in the past before 10th grade. And the other is, coming back to my idea, original thought, don't we think that at some point, if you've achieved enough, you ought to have your past background should no longer matter. So let's look at students who are in the top quartile on math. So these are higher performing math students in the 10th grade. And let's just look at the lowest SES and the highest SES, the lowest 25% of families in wealth and the highest in wealth. And let's look at these same outcomes. And the discouraging fact here is that we see that the gaps are smaller, but they're still huge on every outcome that you could care about. Particularly large about the intent selective college. I think if we had college graduation information, this would start to look really bad as well. That's basically, even if you were the top quarter of students on the 10th grade math test, if you were from a relatively poor family, the odds are stacked against you. You're not likely to, we're going to find you much less likely to graduate from a 4-year college. And of course, that's going to persist into further generations, despite the fact that you were so close. You did so well through the 10th grade, and yet you haven't gotten to the point of being level with everybody else. So let me talk about, what I want to talk about today is the equality of opportunity. I want to just look at a little bit of facts about schools. And I want to ask whether or not those high-performing math students, are you going to different schools? And does the choice of school could it have some plausible predictive power and explanatory power in those differences in outcomes? What's nice about this education longitudinal survey is that it records some information about students' classmates, and it was designed so that there were a chunk of students at each school. 15,000 students, but 750 schools. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to compute the averages on each outcome measure by school, but I'm going to be careful so that, of course, if I counted myself, and I was an outstanding student, I'll make the school look better. So I don't want to count myself. I'll exclude myself from the pure calculations, and then I'm just going to group the schools in a variety of ways. What I'm going to do is I'll show you today, let's just see how many other students like you there are. How many other students, among the 20 students, let's say, per school, what percentage of them were also in the top quartile? I'm isolating to the students who are already themselves in the top quartile, so I'm looking at percentages of students just like them. And again, I'm going to look at the lowest socioeconomic group, the bottom 25% in family income, and compare it to the top 25% in family income. And not surprisingly, but again, interestingly, on every outcome measure, the low SES students are surrounded by fewer students who look like them in terms of math than the high SES students. The high SES students are going to schools where their classmates are more, at least the ones who responded to the survey, are more likely to go to college, are more likely to have taken calculus, are twice as likely to have gone to a selected college. And I'm particularly interested in the calculus point, where I think that two things are going on. One is probably the students from the lowest socioeconomic status families are probably isolated in ways. They're probably at schools where calculus isn't available, and certainly that's a natural entree to a variety of careers. If they are in schools where calculus is available, they may be being directed against it, away from it in some subtle, interesting cultural way that won't show up in a survey. So this to me suggests that, again, all this is going to be correlational. That's all you can do with these national study surveys. This to me suggests that one of the things that's an likely explanation for the relatively poor performance of these high-achieving SES students is the fact that they're just not in such great schools. And I'll just provide one more piece of suggested evidence. What I'd really love to do is to start grouping into dicing and slicing, as they say, the sample into smaller groups. I'd like to look at the combination of students. I'd like to look at top school in terms of percentage of high-performing math students, top high school, top quartile, and then isolate likes versus dislikes. Look at high-performing students in very good schools, and compare high-performing students from low SES in very good schools to high-performing students from high SES in very good schools. In this sample, it starts to press the sample a little bit too much for that. So what I can do is I'll just look at all the group of the top quartile math students, and I'll say, if I group the schools based on into 4 groups, again using this quartile method, but now my groups are based on the percentage of other students who are in the top quartile in the math. So percentage of high-performing math students. School group 1 is the one with the schools with the fewest high-performing math students. School group 4 is the one with the most. And let's just look at the effective schools. And here we see, again, the same kind of pattern. The better the school, the better performance, despite the fact that I've already isolated to just this group of 10th graders who are very high math performers. So what I take away from this is that there's a potentially very interesting story about the opportunities that are available in high school, and that from as a policy standpoint, we ought to be thinking about a couple different things to help level the playing field for these high-performing students who are from lower SES families. Let me just summarize the discussion. To start the discussion, let me just summarize the few points that I think are critical out of this data analysis, and then quickly say a few things about how I think this might connect to policy. The first thing is, as we just said, so much of the achievement gap is still out there, even among students, even if when you go to the group of students who are high-performing 10th graders and even later. I want to make an interesting comment here, which is that there's a brilliant study by the Jack Kent Cook Foundation from about 10 years ago. Josh Weiner, who was a program fellow officer there, generated the study and worked with a couple other folks, including John DiIulio, who's a very well-known social scientist. They looked at all the national surveys they could find, and they tried to say, what does the achievement gap look like at every age? And sometimes they could follow the same students for a few years, and sometimes they had to switch surveys, because there's early childhood surveys, and then middle school surveys, and then high school. Whenever they could track students over any one period of time, at the top, the low-income students fell off. And there was also this more general trend, which is at every age the achievement gap was growing. And what they were interested in is, let's look at the top students. What percentage of the top, if you look at the top quartile, how much does that look representative? I mean, at early ages, it looks really quite representative of the population. But as you get older and older and older, it becomes more and more disparate. That the traditional measures of advantage and disadvantage become more and more predictive of who is at the top in terms of achievement. So we're looking here at 10th grade. I actually think a natural entree is 8th grade because of the transition from middle school to high school. And I think we'd see even stronger results if we looked at high-achieving 8th graders. That the odds are stacked even more against the folks from low SES backgrounds. But basically, the high-achieving 10th graders, or even more probably the high-achieving 8th graders from low SES backgrounds, are attending relatively poor schools in the case of relatively few other high-achieving peers. I didn't have access to a lot of measures of the school in the public use data from this study, but I bet that all these things are correlated. If the school looks bad on one measure, it's not going to look good on others. Furthermore, it does seem like there's an association between the quality of the school, however you might measure it, and your future outcomes, even despite the fact that you've done well up until that point. High school isn't quite like college, so that in college, the thing that's so striking, and what draws to this work, Caroline Hoxby and me to this work at that level, is that students have the choice of any college. Anybody can apply to any college, and the highest, most selective colleges like Harvard have really aggressive outreach programs. And as you may well know, Harvard financial aid initiatives designed to make college free for anybody below a certain income level. So not only are colleges available, but the most selective colleges, in fact, are often available for free to the students from the lowest income families. So that seems like a natural place to look for trying to promote college enrollment. Public school assignment is often based on where you live. And where you live, of course, is no accident, as you've probably all made your own decisions. If you have children, you've probably thought very carefully about where you live and what schools your children will go to, and undoubtedly your parents all did the same. And obviously we're on slippery ground here, but I think it's fair to say that the students from the wealthiest families, those families probably have the most choice of where to live. And so a certain amount, in the places where private schools are not easily affordable, scholarships are not widely available, and schooling is mostly on a neighborhood basis, a certain amount of segregation by socioeconomic status is just going to be systematic. There's no way to get over that. But there are lots of school systems, Boston, New York, Chicago, especially the largest school systems, that use a school choice lottery system that actually resembles a lot college admissions in many ways. And so that seems like a natural place to do some analysis and potentially some interventions. There's growing evidence that those systems actually don't level the playing field either. And it's partly about information. Maybe families don't necessarily know which schools are the best schools, and partly about subtle discriminatory factors that are either built in by design or possibly by accident into the system. Pretty much, I guess, one way of saying it is no matter what your system, sophisticated folks are going to find a way to gain it and get the most advantage. And people who are the most sincere often have the worst outcomes. And so some results, these are mostly by folks other than me. I'll mention some of them. Many of them done by Parag Pathak, who is an MIT economist, and some of his co-authors, and Chris Walters was a student of Parag Pathak, and Josh Angrist, who is another MIT economist. This work tends to find that if you just try to understand from the schools that students list, what are they prioritizing, it looks like the low SES students from the low SES families are prioritizing distance, proximity to home, whereas students from wealthier families are prioritizing academic performance of the schools or any measure of school quality. It's hard to tell whether that's about information or true preference. One possibility is that the students from the poorest families don't even realize that some schools are better than others, or if they did realize it, they don't know which ones are better, so they're being drawn to the schools that are closest to them. In Boston, there's a lot of it where we have some really terrific charter schools that have demonstrated to be good in empirical studies. There's a lot of evidence that the charter schools are the best at raising achievement for students from the poorest families, and yet those families tend not to apply. So that's a real paradox as well. It probably doesn't have that much to do with information, because Parag Pathak and Sean Corcoran, who works with the New York City Research Alliance, have separate papers in which they find that the examination schools, which are famous, Boston Latin, Stuyvesant, Bronx Science in New York, the students in Boston studied by Pathak, and the students in New York studied by Corcoran and others, some of the students who are qualified just don't apply. and particularly the students who don't apply are the ones from the lowest income families. So something interesting is going on here, where somehow the school choice system, which you would think would level the playing field, might not be. And Steve may know something more about New York.
No, well, this is a question about New York. Did anybody do any kind of testing about whether the junior high schools are requiring their students to apply? Because there is.
It's a good question. I don't know the details, and I'd have to go back and look. I think these are students who. There's a question about whether some of these you're required to take an exam. So it may be that it looks like students who would do well on the exam aren't necessarily showing up for the exam. That'd be part of it. And you're right that that's something that the schools can influence.
Yeah, I did go to Brown Science, and I come from that kind of, parents having graduated high school. I don't think my junior high school gave me a choice.
You think you had to take the test?
Because I'm exactly the sort of student you're describing. I had no idea about anything. I had to take the test, and it was like, well, you passed, you're going.
That's a great question, and I've read this work, and I didn't think about that part.
Yeah.
So
I always assumed that was all junior high schools, and it just dawned on me maybe that was the one.
I think actually Parag Pathak's work looks at students who've done well enough on an exam that they could go. Colin, but not sure.
Sorry.
Yes.
So we run part of Uncommon Schools, we're
Yes.
part of management.
Great, so you may know where the.
Yeah, we have like a lot of schools in New York.
Yeah.
All the kids take the exam, like you just take the exam.
They take it.
And then you have the choice to go or not to go.
Okay.
So what happens is the parents end up either influencing that choice, especially if the child has to commute in New York.
Well, and certainly the case that the opportunities are, one part of opportunity is the ability to go a long distance, and it comes back to where you live as well. So,
Exactly.
as someone from the outside, I say, oh my gosh, look at these students and they have these great opportunities and they're not taking them. But they're not necessarily such great opportunities from the perspective of the family. I recognize from the perspective of the family when you look at what would actually be required in terms of logistics.
And just to contribute to your
Yeah.
findings, there was a study done pretty recently, I'll share with you, through the Columbia Teachers College, funded by Robin Hood, I believe, that found that especially these high-performing high schools have a significantly statistically different impact on achievement. So there's like a trend analysis where they show that if kids go to these particular high schools, especially in New York, because he follows these kids from junior high all the way through high school, it
Right.
like completely changes their direction.
Oh, I'd love to hear more about that. Some of these, this is a controversial literature, and so I tried to skirt it a little bit when I showed my sort of associations. There is a lot of the work is based on school lotteries, where you compare lottery winners to lottery losers, or you compare people just above and below the exam school cutoffs. And that's shown strong results for the charter schools in Boston, mixed results for the exam schools. So I'd be interested to know more about this work. So one style of I basically I think of two broad policy responses to this kind of phenomenon. One is to go deeply into the details of the lotteries and try to help students make more informed choices. And I'm recognizing that many students may say, based on where I live, the better choice for me is actually the lower performing high school. But at least that would be more explicit. In the case of exam schools, I think that's a pretty explicit choice. So it's great to know that the students at least have that are aware of those opportunities. One of the things that goes on in New York, and you may know about this much more than me, I do think the rules are subtly discriminatory. There's a lot of schools that require some version of audition, and you have to show up for an information day, and it's not necessarily publicized, or even if it is publicized, obviously some people are going to know more about it than others. If you go to a school where they say, okay, everybody, let's make sure that everybody goes to this event, that's going to make that you eligible to attend this great high school near us. You have a big advantage over someone who's at a different school. Sarah Otis, who's a doctoral student who works with me, is potentially working with some of the folks in New York to try to do some interventions that would try to inform families about these rules, and especially get students who could qualify to make sure that they actually attend those days. So that's the kind of work that seems very natural and could conceivably make a big difference in outcomes. Just providing more information and trying to get over the details of the system. My co-authors, Caroline Hoxie and Sarah Turner, have done a lot of work where they've just, along these lines at the college level, where they mail packets of information to high-performing students that they've identified through work with the College Board and the ACT. And more and more there's information, and they're finding strong effects on just providing a little bit of information changes course quite a lot for well-qualified students who might not have had enough information to figure out where to apply. And you can imagine, as in the age of the internet and big data, school report cards, as they become more accessible and easier to understand, can have similar effects for folks in terms of leveling the playing field in terms of information. And I also did want to mention that obviously, like Uncommon Schools is doing, many nonprofits are explicitly working to help low SES families figure out the choices in the choice of school. We have Citizens, one of them locally here is Citizen Schools, which is an after-school program for middle school students. And I don't know exactly what they're doing right now, but for many years, explicitly one of their activities for the 7th and 8th graders is to help them think about how to navigate the Boston school lottery, which is not so easy. Okay, so I have now, and I guess one other point I don't have on the slides is another natural thing to do is to try to promote higher achievement or more ambitious work in schools that don't look as good on the surface, either at the school system level or at the school level. Two different kinds of work that approaches to this. Mark Long, who's a professor at the University of Washington, has been working with the College Board. Kirabo Jackson's professor at Northwestern has been studying efforts in Texas, where many schools are trying to expand their advanced placement offerings and then promote the use of advanced placement for students who clearly are qualified but hadn't been aiming there so far. That work is just getting started, but it looks pretty promising. Josh Goodman, who's my colleague here at the Kennedy School, has been doing some work with school districts in a couple of different school districts at the 8th grade level, where they're trying to systematize and expand the access to algebra, thinking that that's going to get people on the better track going into high school. And that's just getting started as well. But these seem like natural approaches. At the college level, the problem's sort of easier to solve, at least for the students who can make it to the most selective colleges. Just get them to apply. The opportunities already exist. At the high school level, the system's much more complicated. A lot depends on where you already live. But it may be possible, as I said, to even work within the existing schools to try to promote better outcomes. For me, this is just the start, I hope, of a new series of projects and an agenda over some period of time, because I think I've been very much energized by the idea that we should look back before college to high school. And as I said, the Josh Weiner, Jack Kent Hook paper has reminded me that if the achievement gap is growing by bounds and over time, there are things that one can do to try to help reverse that, both in terms of research, but especially with research aimed at trying to help districts and other folks think about possible interventions that may change and hopefully reduce the achievement gap to some degree. So I want to talk for a little bit longer than I imagined, but I'm delighted to see if you have other thoughts, other things you want to talk about, and we definitely have time. Yeah, yes. Please.
Looking at the issue of exam schools and school choice, has anybody looked into how the process is managed? Because certainly the high SES people have a level of cultural capital that the low SES people don't.
Yes.
And many of these events are set up in such a way that they are impenetrable.
Right.
And alienating.
Absolutely.
Is anybody working on that?
So, I know that there, as I said, one, maybe you may know some other things. I know that as a part of the work, we've been trying to help people prepare for school choice lotteries. There are definitely programs in a lot of these cities that are basically test prep programs designed at the low income students, because obviously that's got to be a level in the playing field. In Boston, the school system goes back and forth on the following issue every year when they have the exam entries for Gross and Latin, which is typically going into the 7th grade, but I think there's some in the high school too. a lot of students show up they've never heard of before. These students have been in the private schools all the way until that time. And so you have to figure out what's the right, how do you weight the test score with prior achievement, and there's a lot of debate. And should there be some trying to skew the admission rules in favor of students who've already been in the public schools? Big political issues, but definitely, there's a clear awareness that if you're not careful, you're going to have your exam schools full of high SES kids who never attended the public schools before and wouldn't attend them if they can't get into the top exam schools.
I know that New York so we're going into Camden this summer, we're looking at brand new school, and the New Jersey schools are looking at generalized lotteries. So no more distinct lotteries for the charter schools. Every child goes into the lottery, and then they get a choice of all the different schools. So that should change the game significantly, because it wouldn't matter anymore. You had to apply. You don't have to apply. You just are in a lottery, right?
But is anybody working on the other end with parents?
We'll see, and that was my question, which is, so Uncommon Schools does, we often employ, we have like dean of students, and we have social workers and nurses in our schools, and we require some level of parent participation in our community events. So what we try to do is create community. That's going to increase, especially with these Renaissance schools in Camden, where there are more economic development initiatives than they are just primarily education initiatives, and they need to provide background services. And that was my question, which is, if these are cultural capital challenges, and what we are finding, because we actually trace our kids all the way through to college completion. So even when they go to college, we actually continue to provide them services, like our college counselors visit them on a quarterly basis to check how they're doing in school, make sure that they get all, the trip to Walmart to like out to dinner and off campus, what maybe their parents could provide them. And we're finding a lot of that, which I think is a demand side issue, because most of the conversation to date has been on the supply side, right? Which is quality of education, how can you deliver those services, but the demand side, whether or not kids are, and I don't know to what degree that side is being worked on, because I don't know, I'm sure from an international development perspective, this is actually engaged upon, which is if you find like mother's education level higher, you will find a correlation with child's education as distinct from father's, and then what does that mean for what you do for the parents that might even magnify the child's learning?
In general, basically the holy grail of all program effects is parental participation. And every school district has the experience of, well, we create all these parent nights, and we bring in all these experts, and who shows up? It's the parents who already knew everything already. Who doesn't show up? The parents who really could benefit the most from the information. And it's just, there's so many explanations for why, and one of them is the parents who need the information are the parents who have the least, are working at night, have the least, can't get a babysitter, or have the least ability to show up, and are the most taxed on all other fronts. But there is some interesting work that's starting to go on. Bridget Long, who's the academic dean at the Ed School, has been working hard on a series of college savings programs, which involve working with families early on to help them understand exactly the process of financing college and why it's valuable to save for college. So that, you clearly have to build the foundation to get any long-term results. Todd Rogers, behavioral psychologist, is my colleague here, who comes from the tradition of studying voting, initiatives to increase voting, is now very energized about initiatives to get parents more involved in educational decisions, and has a bunch of projects going on. He and I are hoping to team up on projects along these lines about trying to help get parents involved with the school choice, and also especially the keeping students on track to advanced classes. And my hope, I think your instinct may be right, that in fact that may be, if you can get the parents involved, that may be dramatically more successful in terms of magnitudes of effects than anything else. Yeah.
Just picking up on that, this is not an evaluation, so it's not any data.
Yeah.
I worked part of the year in Arizona where there was a huge issue about different communities and who gets funded what. The math department has a program for thinking about involving parents in why their students, particularly their daughters, should do math, which is big. And that's been quite helpful, but the cultural aspect, it has to be in Spanish. The whole thing has to be in Spanish or it's not going to get anywhere. And it's helpful not to do it at the school, but to make it in a community center or somewhere where people feel comfortable. Otherwise, the parents who may not be very well educated kind of feel they're going to be in trouble if they come to this thing. And so there's a big piece there. Now, can I answer the question as well?
Absolutely.
Okay. I'm interested if you took any of your bar graphs and split them, for example, by gender or by minority status or whatever. Do they look similar for the different groups?
I didn't do that with this data. It would be easy to do with this data. You find predictable findings by race and SES overlap considerably. So mostly if you split by race, you find similar things. If you, however, if you look at disadvantaged Asian students, their patterns tend to be different than others, at least in some contexts. Gender is a different matter and obviously brings in a whole different set of questions about boys, girls, and math. You do find these bifurcated findings that girls outperform boys on most measures, but not on the math. But you knew that already. In any case, so thank you all for coming. I hope you have a wonderful day. I will just show you that I have this wonderful slide, all lots of references. You can't read any of it, but if you email me, I'm happy to send it to you. If you have any thoughts, I would love to hear them. Oh, and I actually have one thought I did want to close on, which is that we can think about this problem from the issue of the Kennedy School recruiting. And so, essentially what we just said is, lots of information out there is not available to students from, there's a lot of high-achieving students who don't know about their school options just because of where they come from and their potential lack of disconnection to social networks. What does that say to the Kennedy School? There are probably lots of students out there in different parts of the country and different parts of the world who would be great students at the Kennedy School who don't know about options to come to the Kennedy School. So in some of my internal work, I've been working with Suzanne Shendy, who's the director of our Mason program at the International One-Year Mid-Career MPA. We've been trying to tap our social networks and just ask, who are some interesting people you might know in different places around the world? South Africa, Korea, Indonesia, Yemen. And we just asked lots of networks, because interesting people are coming, well-connected people are coming through the Kennedy School all the time. And in the last couple of years, we've been able to find some very interesting applicants. We've been encouraged to apply. A number of them are here this year. And so what I'd like to say to you and others is, one way you can help us is by helping us to find really great applicants who wouldn't otherwise apply. And two natural ways to do that. One, just tell them to apply and help, if necessary, help walk them through the process of applying. The other, send me an email. And I can either help them directly or put them in touch with the right person. Any of our programs. I've been emphasizing the International One-Year Mid-Career because I've had the feeling that those are the folks who probably, if you find them, can have the most impact on the world and might have the least information about the Kennedy School. But I think this applies to all of our programs. So please, I would love to hear from you. If that gives you another reason to write to me, that would be spectacular.